Welcome to the HR Uprising podcast. This podcast series explores HR hot topics and challenges through conversations with relevant experts and real-life HR, learning, and OD professionals. The HR Uprising is about learning through collaboration and evidence-based action. We want colleagues to have the confidence and skills to rise up through their organizations by delivering real, lasting business value. Now, introducing your host, chartered psychologist, experienced change agent, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach, Lucinda.
Hi there, it's Lucinda from the HR Uprising, and listening to your feedback, particularly over the 12 HRs in 12 minutes or almost 12 minutes that we carried out in December, a number of you really enjoyed hearing people's stories, and it got me to thinking about how we can do this differently, not just have industry experts when we're having conversations with others, but how we can hear more. I always wanted to have conversations with real life HR professionals. So over the next 6 months or so, I'm intending to do a couple of different types of conversation with this year. One of them is going to be a conversation with HR directors. So essentially understanding an extended version of what we did with the 12 HRs, understanding people's career paths, their journey, the lessons they've learnt, and actually their experience as to how they've got into a senior role in HR. And if that's something that's relevant to other people, hopefully we can all take lessons from that. So that's what today's podcast is about. But the other type of podcast I'm going to do is going to be talking to CEOs and senior managers within businesses and asking them about what they really want from HR. Because often we are maligned, aren't we? We get told what we should and shouldn't be doing. And I thought it would be great to hear from the business point of view, what do they value that HR brings to the party? And what else can we do to bring value to an organisation? So those are two different types of conversation with subjects that we're going to do this year, alongside, as ever, where there are topics that I can research or have some expertise or knowledge in, where we can carry on also providing those nuggets of knowledge for people. So please do keep on letting me know if there's something you'd like me to look into or explore, or you're an expert in, that we can share that knowledge as well to this population, which is growing all the time. So this is our first conversation with, or extended conversation with, an HR director. And I'm really pleased to have as my first guest in this area a gentleman called Dan Simpson, who I've known for about 20 odd years. He'll hear that as we go through things. Some of you know, if you heard the conversation, the interview that Sian did with me back in December, that I spent a large proportion of my career at Siemens. Prior to that, I worked at Pfizer, and Dan was one of the people that I was lucky enough to work with. We did various things with assessment centres. We were in different businesses, so we didn't work together all the time. And it's interesting to hear the opportunities that you can get working for a large global organisation. Not all positive, but there's definitely some really good insights there. So I really look forward, hope you enjoy this conversation with Dan Simpson. I'd now like to welcome Dan Simpson, who is the Head of People and Leadership for Europe at Siemens. Dan, welcome to the HR Uprising.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on. Now, I know you've had quite a detailed career progression, I guess, as you've been through a number of roles, so I met you way back in my history. Would you be kind enough to walk us through your career to date and any sort of highlights that people could pick up from your journey so far?
Yes, I'd be delighted, and thanks very much for having me on, Lucinda. So my career has been a series of happy coincidences and serendipity, where I've met people and through those relationships have found opportunities. And I think that's one of the tricks of having a career I've learned. So I started my working life in Sainsbury's. I didn't know what I wanted to do after university. I had some vague idea that the army might be a good idea, but after some early experiences in the officer training corps at university, I soon worked out that wasn't for me. And I ended up working for Sainsbury's, and I was very fortunate because I decided to bolster my CV and join the staff council as a student representative. And the supermarkets board visited my stall, and I ended up sat next to the group HR director, a very nice chap called John Adshead. And I'd formed quite a good bond with the personnel manager. I was intrigued with the work that she did as the closest advisor to the store manager at the time. And I asked a rather cheeky question to the marketing director, who'd produced some truly terrible advertising campaigns for Sainsbury's. And at the end of it, the group HR director said, what would you like to do with your future? And I said, well, I'd quite like to go into HR like you. He said, oh, very good. Here's my card. Write to my secretary. And I did. And he was true to his word. 2 weeks later, I found myself on an assessment centre for personnel managers in training at Sainsbury's. And
wow, fair enough.
I passed that assessment centre, but it was really great, Lucinda. This is kind of one of my first, HR 101 tricks. Never let anybody near a HR office who doesn't know how the business works. And they said to me, you need to go and spend a year on the shop floor, really understanding how a supermarket works, because only then will you be an effective HR person. So I rolled my sleeves up. I got stuck in, had a brilliant 12 months as a trainee manager. And another happy coincidence happened. I formed another good relationship with my store manager, who I now know was one of the high potentials of the company. And the store that we worked in was frequently visited by the directors of Sainsbury's. And one of the directors visited the store. And I was in charge of the comic relief preparations, because Sainsbury's was the principal sponsor of comic relief then. And I got to meet John, and John took a shine to me and asked me if I'd like to come and be his executive assistant, his PA, chief of staff type thing, which was one of Sainsbury's routes of picking people out. And so I, for 18 months then, was this guy's PA. And I drove him around. I organised his life. I made sure he was fully prepped and ready for meetings, events and things. And I can honestly tell you, he was one of the most difficult people I've ever had to work with and for. He was a little bit old-fashioned in his style, would frequently shout and swear at me all hours of the morning, because I was 7 days a week in that car or in the office with him. But it really did teach me two things. It taught me resilience, and it taught me to deliver with pace and speed. And when I came out of that assignment, I was streets ahead of my peer group, because I'd seen so much of what actually goes on at the strategic level, not just the operational level. And from there, I did an assignment in London. So Sainsbury's were doing a big restructuring of the supermarkets business. I became part of the change management team, so I had my first bit of exposure to OD. And it was through that relationship with John, a personnel manager vacancy arose, and he placed me into one of the stores. And I was the personnel manager at our store at Kempshire, at Basingstoke, and then at Guildford Town Centre. And it was while I was doing my CIPD, I met somebody from Siemens. And the two of us hooked up, got on really well. And somebody you'll remember from the past, Lucinda, Teresa Frost, was looking for a talent management executive to come and help her with this new concept that Siemens were developing. Now, I had no idea who Siemens were. I had a vague recollection that they sponsored Real Madrid Football Club at the time. And I went along.
I know. I do remember moving there myself and having not heard of them, and then realising they employed 20,000 people as it was, feeling very ignorant.
I know, and it's when you then look up and you see not only what they employ at the country level, but globally. I mean, when I joined Siemens in 2004, the company could say there were 500,000 people around the world who worked for them. And we used to have a saying in Siemens that there are only two organisations that have more people. One was Coca-Cola, and the second was the Catholic Church in location. So brilliant, insight. And I kind of felt I'd done my time at Sainsbury's. The business was actually going through some difficult times, because it was when it issued its profits warning. And I sort of just got a bit fed up of hearing about bad news. And the opportunity to join Siemens, retail's a tough gig, holidays, around all the time. You're working when most people are on holiday. So Christmas and Easter and things like that. So the chance to do something different in a cool company like Siemens arose. And I went to work for Teresa. And this is where I first met you, Lucinda, when we were rolling out all of our development programs. And I rolled out the new performance management process for Siemens. And then I rolled out the executive succession planning process. And I supported Teresa in doing that. And Teresa was a fabulous mentor for me, because she was somebody that was so connected to the business, yet she was able to go onto stage and really sell it. and she made our function look good. And I remember at the time, there was a fair amount of envy from Teresa's colleagues, because she was actually becoming the kind of hub for a lot of the HR activity, which I think talent management can sometimes uniquely do. Talent management can pull together various strands across the organisation. And so,
would you say that's, can I just ask you on that? So would you say it was talent management? Was it OD? Or was, that kind of, because I do see that it's quite different from some of the other aspects of HR.
Yeah, so I would say to you, for sure, we were definitely not doing OD at that point.
Right.
But I would like to talk to you a lot about OD in terms of what I've done subsequently, because I think OD uniquely now can play that role in an organisation. And I think every business partner must have an OD mindset. But I think that what we were doing at the time was we were actually answering one of the fundamental questions, which I'll come back to, which is, HR is not about doing HR stuff. HR is about being a partner to the business, and it's helping the business build the capability it needs to deliver its promises to its stakeholders. And capability is a big word. I'm not talking about the simple definition of capability. I'm talking about the McKinsey 7S model of the systems, the structures, the staffing, the style, or for other that mean culture. So it's the total gamut. And I think what we were doing there was engaging the business in a conversation about what's actually going on where you are. And it was a brilliant time. I loved it. You and I worked together when we were rolling out development centres, and you were one of our assessors, Lucinda, and we used EDI and OPP to simulate assessments, which were really cool. And again, I learned something there, which was that you really do need to assessment centres and development centres are still empirically the closest match you will get to a real world event. So if you want to look at somebody performing a job, they still have the highest correlation. Of course, what they do have is a lot of cost and organisational effort that goes around them. I mean, you'll remember we used to have to really take 4 days out of people's lives in order to do that. And the question now in a more agile world is whether that's a good time investment or whether you can do it in other ways. And then I met a guy called Mike Jones, who was the HR director for our power generation business. And Mike said to me, we've got this little business called Wind Power. We don't really know much about it at the moment. There's about 50 people. We need a HR director, head of HR, to come and help set it up. And, my career advice had been, right, you've done your bit in the centre, great. You've got your corporate bit. You now need to go and have some operational experience in a Siemens context. So I went to become the head of HR for Siemens Wind Power. And wow, that was one of the best decisions I ever made. I had another offer on the table from Siemens at that time, from someone who is to this day still my mentor. And I really wanted to go and work for him in his part of the business. But I knew that the part of the business that Mike was offering me would be actually a bigger stretch for me. And working with him would be a different challenge to working to the other guy. So sometimes we have those crossroad moments, don't we, where you have to make that call. And I opted for the wind power business, and could honestly say, don't regret it for a single day, because we grew that business so fast. I mean, we were setting up sales, project management, commercial contracting, logistics, and we had partnerships with the British Army. We're hiring cool army officers to come and move this kind of kit around. And we grew the business massively. I mean, it went from, that sort of 50 people, to well over 1,000 people. And, it was great. Unfortunately, in that line of work, it's high risk. And to go with the great highs we had of the big project wins and the building the team, we also had 2 employees were killed in industrial accidents in our business. And that taught me a whole new, if you like, the resilience I'd learned until then was really tested when you were put into that high pressure crisis management situation where somebody had died. And that's just no matter what problems you're having at work on a day-to-day basis, if someone goes to work and doesn't come home, it's a total system failure. And we had to address that total system failure, both as a leadership team, but also with the wider community and where the guy lived. We went to the funeral, and we had to arrange counselling for our employees. But it was always about remembering Colin, who died, and making sure that he didn't die in vain, and that we were able to learn the lessons of what happened. And that's when I first started to really understand what true OD meant, because at that point we realised that the systematic failure that had occurred in our organisation was effectively one of behaviour. And the behaviour that we needed to change and correct became a system-wide OD challenge. And so we started to engage with drama-based groups to change behaviour around health and safety. And then even after I left, they continued with that work, which I think was absolutely instrumental in changing the health and safety culture of our business. And because I was known as Mr. Talent from my corporate days, I used to have a double hat for Mike. So he gave everyone, kind of special project to do. Mine was talent. And through that, I got to know Toby Payton-Jones, who was the UK HR director for Siemens until a year ago. Now, I would like to, if it's okay, just make special mention of Toby, because Toby has been a very big part of my life. And I learned so much from Teresa. I learned so much from Mike. I learned so much from a great guy called Rob Voss. And Toby was the kind of pinnacle of that learning for me, because he taught me things that I use to this day, that I will always use and that I would pass on to other people. And he was just a great human being. Toby was one of those really unique, diverse individuals who was able, under huge pressure, to always keep his composure, keep his calm, and navigate and chart a way to the future. So it was a real privilege to be asked to go and work for Toby. And he asked me to create a new centre of competence, which brought together the recruitment, the development, and the learning side in Northwest Europe, as we were then. And to build a team, to right size the team, to get the team into a good shape. And I've done a version of that until talking to you now, where Siemens has gone through various HR transformations. Because of the network I then built internationally and globally, I found myself placed into the global centre of competence around people and leadership. And for the past 3 years, I've been completely redesigning and implementing a new construct about how we do 3 things: right work, right location, and right people, so that we get a different type of conversation going on around people and leadership. And you find me here today.
That's quite a journey, and what's coming through from all of that is your pattern of resilience, the importance of that, and also relationships, isn't it? So you've clearly been a real relationship builder, maybe a networker. Do you network outside of Siemens?
I do. Yes, I do. So I'm very lucky that so somebody else I would like to give special mention to is Nick Holly. So I was fortunate enough to meet Nick back in 2010, I think it was. And Nick was running the Henley HR Centre of Excellence. He now runs the Corporate Research Forum. And I went to one of Nick's seminars, which was just brilliant. Nick was talking about things that I hadn't even dreamt about. And I got talking to him afterwards, and Nick said to me, "You need to go and meet a guy called Mike Haffenden and the Corporate Research Forum." And so I went to meet Mike, and he's really tough, hard guy, brilliant headhunter, and very, very committed to the further development of the HR profession. And he recommended that I join the Corporate Research Forum. And again, that was one of the best decisions I made, because in joining the Corporate Research Forum, going to their events, you network with not only the best of academia, but also with your peers. And I've learned so much. The research reports that are produced, the conversations you have on the tables. So together with Nick and the research that the CRF do, I've really been able to broaden my horizons outside of the organisation. And I'm a great believer in constantly scanning the horizon so that you're ensuring you're bringing the best of the outside in. But one important thing I learned from Nick, Lucinda, which I think is really important, is the danger in scanning the outside and bringing it in is that you lose the context. And context is so important when you're trying to design things that make sense for your environment. So how many organizations copied blindly General Electric's 70-20-10 model and just implemented it, but did not get the success that they wanted from it? It's countless examples. And obviously the worst of them being Enron, who had this real high performer culture based upon that. And I think that it's really important as a HR professional that with your OD mindset, that when you diagnose a problem, you don't just then go to the first shiny thing on the shelf that you may have read about in the Harvard Business Review or seen in the seminar. You have to then critically evaluate it to understand if contextually it would apply to your organization. And, that was one of the things that I learned. One of my passions is diversity and inclusion. And I had a real challenge getting Siemens to buy into diversity and inclusion.
So that's your next link there. So is that now your responsibility, diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, so diversity and inclusion has been part of my portfolio since 2010. When I first picked it up, it was very much seen as a compliance-related topic, where are we complying with the Equality Act? And I have to confess, as from a personal learning perspective, I was probably one of those people that wondered a little bit whether diversity was just another extension of health and safety gone mad. And I'm pleased to say that I disabused myself of those notions and came to really see the critical importance that diversity and inclusion has to the organisation. Now, of course, the danger of that is that when you have your eyes open to something, when you see something for what it is, you become an advocate. And I became a little too over advocating of D&I. So although most people accept it's the right thing to do, actually, if you are, like in my context, a white man of a certain age, possibly German, you can feel very threatened by that. And it's not your fault that actually you've been rewarded and praised for achieving a level of efficiency, productivity, and success. And then you get this bunch of people saying to you, but you know what? We need to disrupt you. And we need to make you inefficient for a little while. And you need to bring some different people into the organization. And if you've not been schooled in any of these topics, then it can be a very scary thing to do. So it's no surprise that you have to really attack this problem from multiple angles. Otherwise, people will just shut down. So what I realized with D&I was that advocacy was not enough. I could tell people that they needed to do something about it, but I needed to provide some data. So we did three things, Lucinda, which I'm still to this day really proud of. I mean, we decided to go and make some data-based decisions. So I work in a technology company, engineering and technology company. They're very data literate people. And somehow that can almost be used as a crime. It's not. It's an absolute strength. So I needed some data to convince them, first of all, that D&I made sense. So we partnered with the National Equality Standard, through Ernst & Young. And we did a rigorous EY-style audit on our D&I practices. And we presented them with some data. And I remember one of the executive leadership team coming back to me and saying, wow, that was the best external presentation we've ever had. Because no one was lecturing them, but people were still able to make the link between more innovation, more profit, and more productivity with a diverse environment. The second thing we did was we decided to make, really conscious this idea that unconscious bias is something which is inherent in all of us. But if we have a better understanding of that, we could create a more inclusive environment. So we then made an investment in unconscious bias training, which was quite a big step for Siemens, because I know some of the professional service environments have been doing it for years, but from an engineering and technology company, that was a big step to make.
On that, Dan, have you seen a return on that unconscious bias training? Because there has been some skepticism as to whether or not it works, hasn't there?
There has. And I totally understand why that is, because I think people see unconscious bias training as a silver bullet. They think that if you do that, it will solve a problem. But I always took the approach that unconscious bias training is like one of those wearable devices you put on your wrist. It gives you a nudge and tells you when you haven't done enough steps for the day. And so what it does is it systematically changes your behavior over a period of time. And I believe we did see a return on the unconscious bias training. I mean, we had some proprietary software from one of our providers that showed that we had reduced the implicit bias from some of our control groups. We also had a bit of a spike in our employee helpline where people were calling and being more open to discussing issues and topics around their workplace, around my manager's not doing this or my manager's not doing that. So I think we did change the conversation. And of course, it then went hand in hand with a more broader conversation about awareness of mental health issues, which was, when you change the dialogue and you change the conversation, which of course is what good OD does. I'm a big believer in, a dialogue method of OD, where you construct different pictures for people to go towards. Then that is what we tried to do with D&I. And I think if you look at the D&I practice in Siemens in the UK now, but also globally, it's a million miles away from the place that we started back in 2010.
So Dan, so people listening to this, often what we need is things that are quite practical in terms of the takeaways. And one of the things I just wanted to drill in there, which I think is a really interesting one, is this whole dialogue, changing the dialogue around OD, being OD, doing OD.
Yes.
Because over the podcast I've done over the last 6 months, one of the most popular ones is trying to demystify OD.
Uh-huh.
So for people listening out there, what practical steps did you do or would you do to create a different dialogue in these areas? Okay,
so one of them, yeah, I mean, and you're so right, Lucinda, because OD's kind of acquired this almost like mythical quality and status. The trick of great OD is to first of all frame the problem around. I call them generative images. It's this idea of where are we now? Actually get people to describe and discuss exactly where they are now with the problems that go with it. So I'm, again, privileged to work with a really wonderful man called Chris Goscombe, who is a practitioner of appreciative inquiry. That's not to scare anybody off. All it means is that you go in and you really have a conversation with people and ask them to describe the environment as they see it and as they feel it. And Chris uses, for example, very simple Lego models to get people to describe how they're feeling and how they would like to express how they feel in that environment. And then you create a generative image on the other side and you say, well, what would an image of the future look like that you were all willing to support and buy into? And by creating those two pictures, you can then start to imagine the map that goes between how do you go from one place to the other, and how do you regularly check in by doing experiments, by having conversations to its success. One of the things that we did was we created what we called a practitioner community, where we invited people who were doing OD work. And OD work you'll find everywhere. Anybody that's running a workshop, doing a little experiment in a department or an area is practicing a piece of OD. And the question is, have they changed the behavior and the mindset of the people that they're trying to bring along with them, so that they actually think and act differently at the end of it? So I would thoroughly encourage anyone to use just some simple techniques like world cafes, appreciative inquiry, even bringing some postcards along to a workshop and spreading them out on the desk and saying to people, pick up 2 or 3 postcards that describe how you're feeling today.
So those are really nice workshop-y type things. I was just thinking, one of the things that's changed a lot since we were working in the same environment is, and Siemens has always been pretty good at allowing people to go to workshops and having time out. Mm-hmm. Do you do any of this virtually? Because often that's the challenge, is actually getting people together. Have you? I don't know whether you have. Or have you any opportunities to do OD in a more virtual collaborative manner?
Yes, we have. So last year we organised a series of hackathons, which took place all across the world, where people were using technology in Siemens, we use the circuit technology, where you've got circuit meeting rooms, equipped with cameras, where you've got groups of people still coming together to a degree, but in smaller groups and working virtually. So yes, we have, and it was a huge success.
That's great. So it's just we've got to move with the times, haven't we? And if we're trying to do OD, is help people maximise the time and get that collaboration going. So people were collaborating because they could see other groups of people through the technology.
So what we were doing is we were using a series of tools to help people. So concept board is one of the tools that has been used, and actually that I've used more practically with my team. So my team are spread out across Europe. They're not all in the UK. And what we do when we have our meetings, we use the concept board in order to create a virtual whiteboard, and then you can brainstorm ideas live so people can see the ideas going up onto the virtual concept board. We can group them, debate them, we can dynamically edit them, and at the end of it you have almost what I would describe as a product, and your product then can be updated in real time because everyone's got access to the concept board to be able to go in and use that data whenever they wish.
Sounds great. I like it. Okay, so Dan, I'm just conscious of your time here. There's lots of stuff we've gone into there, a little bit about your background, but also some really nice insights into actually how you've, I suppose, brought a sort of real passion to things like diversity, inclusion and health and safety, which can often be tick boxing. So you've brought those to life. We talked about OD. If you were to look back to yourself back in the Sainsbury's days, have you got is there anything you'd have done differently? What advice would you give your younger self?
Yes, I would say to my younger self, I think two things. The first thing would be to relax and hold dilemmas and conflicts a lot more lightly. So Toby really taught me that it's so important to maintain your sense of perspective, even when it's in the heat of the moment, to really not worry about what other people are thinking about you. I was somebody early on that was very, very concerned about what other people thought of me. And a lot of my self-esteem and my resilience was based around, did I have that positive affirmation from other people? Now I'm much better able to self-regulate my own self-esteem and my own sense of self, of worth, without having that to be told to me by other people. So of course I still need the feedback, and so going out and seeking feedback I think is really, really important. But actually, regulating myself and knowing that I'm doing a good job is a good thing. The second thing I would teach myself is focus on control the controllables. I used to worry terribly about what might happen here, there and everywhere. And actually, how much control did I have over those events? None. But I can control how I turn up, how I perform, how I interact with other people. And if a decision gets made either in the Sainsbury's boardroom or the Munich boardroom, I'm not going to be able to influence that, but I can control how I react and how I choose to turn up. And I think that's really important advice to give to my younger self. And I hope they would be useful to other people who may experience the same thing.
Yeah, so be almost more internally measured on what it is and just focus on what's within your control, because you can worry so much about that stuff that's out of your control, and that can actually set you back, can't it?
It can. I think control the controllables is a super mantra for life. It's what a lot of sports people use as well to control their performance on the sports field, whichever field they choose to go out on. And it's that other one of mine about actually not worrying about what other people think about you. Because you're never going to please all the people all the time. And if you live your life needing to have that affirmation from others, actually, you're probably not going to fulfill your potential. It took me a little while to realize that. My dad always called it wearing my heart on my sleeve. And of course, I still will wear my heart on my sleeve when I need to, but I'm much better at, taking a measured view about when I can't change something as well.
No, that makes lots of sense. And then my final question is, from a sort of HR perspective, if you were to have an HR magic wand, Dan, that you could wave, whether it's over the profession or people that you work with, what would you, or a superpower, if you like, the other way of looking at it, what would it be?
So I would copy Superman in the original Christopher Reeve movie, which is the best. And I would fly around the earth several times to turn back time to the beginning of HR. And I would eradicate all use of the term HR and then go forward and call us something else around purpose and growth. Because for me, the purpose of HR is not to do HR. The purpose of HR is to build the capability that the business needs to deliver the promises it makes to its stakeholders. And those stakeholders are all the people that are buying its products or the shareholders. And HR has got this mindset that its customers are all internal. And what do my customers think of me? And as soon as you get into that master-servant environment, you are never going to be able to add the value that you can from because like we were talking about, Lucinda, OD is about taking a systems view of the organization. An organization is a system just like the human body. And you have to be able to understand how the system fits in together. But too many people in HR are committed to being process owners, controllers, and masters of data. And I just do not think that is the future of our profession.
I think that's a really strong place to end on, actually. There's a number of quotes about it's not just about HR stuff. And actually, potentially what you're saying there is that's the way to progress through an organisation. It's not just about relationships. It's about seeing that purpose and that business value and making sure you're taking that journey. I guess, the data has a place and the processes have a place to support some of that, but it's not letting that be the be all and end all.
Exactly, Lucinda. It's about understanding how everything you're doing is in service of helping the business to deliver its promises to its stakeholders. So if you're Apple, or if you're Google, or if you're Sainsbury's, or you're Siemens, or if you're an SME, you are making a promise to somebody that when they buy your product or service, that's what they're going to get. And they're going to get that with the highest quality, the best price, all the things that we know. HR's job is to sit alongside as part of that management team, as part of the leadership team, and build the capability to ensure it can deliver its promises. If you think you can just sit there and come up with a HR solution and then go look and find the problem that it's got to solve, you've done it completely the wrong way. I've always believed that if you walk into a boardroom, you should not be able to spot who the HR director is.
Yeah, I like it. Great. Dan, thank you so much for being on the HR Uprising. I've really enjoyed catching up with you, actually, and so much there to hear. So very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Lucinda. It's lovely to talk to you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast. You can access more information, including resources or links mentioned in the show, at our website, www.hruprising.com. Also, you might want to join our LinkedIn community or tweet to us at HR Uprising. We'd love to hear from you.